The silence in the private tasting room of Lumiere, the city's most prestigious 3-star Michelin restaurant, was not peaceful. It was suffocating, heavy with the terrifying weight of impending doom. Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Enterprises and a man whose net worth could buy small countries, sat at the head of the long mahogany table staring down at a plate of truffle-infused lobster thermidor with eyes that were cold, dead, and utterly unimpressed. Behind him, a phalanx of nervous assistants held their breath, clutching clipboards as if they were shields, while in front of him, the renowned head chef Marco stood sweating profusely, his hands trembling inside his pristine white pockets. For 3 months, Julian had been suffering from a severe psychosomatic form of anorexia, brought on by the trauma of a corporate betrayal and the stress of managing a global empire. To him, food had lost all flavor, tasting like ash, like cardboard, like nothingness. He was starving to death in a world of abundance, his body weakening while his temper grew sharper and more lethal by the day. "Take it away," Julian whispered, his voice raspy but cutting through the room like a jagged blade. Chef Marco flinched as if struck. But Mr. Thorne, this lobster was flown in from Maine this morning. The sauce took 48 hours to reduce. Please, just one bite." Julian stood up, his tall frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over the table, and with a sudden, violent motion, he swept the expensive porcelain plate off the table. The crash was deafening, lobster and sauce splattering across the floor like a crime scene. "I said take it away," Julian roared, the hunger in his stomach clawing at him like a wild beast. "It tastes like plastic. Is this what I pay you for? To feed me garbage? Get out! Everyone, get out!" The room emptied in seconds, leaving Julian alone in the opulent silence, leaning against the table, his hand clutching his burning, empty stomach, a single tear of frustration welling in his eye. He was the most powerful man in the city, yet he couldn't conquer the simple act of eating dinner. Meanwhile, in the humid, noisy, steam-filled hell of the back kitchen, Alara Vance was fighting a different kind of battle. Her hands were red and raw, submerged in scalding soapy water as she scrubbed a mountain of greasy pots and pans that seemed to multiply every time she blinked. She was 23, once a promising culinary student with dreams of opening her own bistro, but after her father's gambling debts destroyed her family and left her destitute, she had been forced to drop out and take the lowest job possible just to survive. "Faster, you useless girl!" Chef Marco stormed into the kitchen, his face red from the humiliation upstairs. He kicked a bucket of water near Alara's feet, soaking her worn-out sneakers. "The CEO hates the food. It's all because the kitchen has bad energy. And you are the bad energy. Scrub those pans until they shine, or don't bother coming back tomorrow." Alara bit her lip, tasting blood, but she didn't say a word, knowing that one word of defiance would cost her the paycheck she needed to buy medicine for her sick grandmother. She kept her head down, scrubbing rhythmically, letting her mind drift to the recipes her grandmother used to teach her, the only happy memories she had left. By 2 a.m., the kitchen was finally silent. The chefs had gone home, the lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Alara was exhausted, her stomach rumbling loudly in the quiet room. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She looked around the pristine stations. There were leftovers, foie gras, caviar, prime cuts of beef, but she knew taking them would be theft. Instead, she walked to the discard bin where they kept the peasant food, meant for the staff meal that never happened. She found a bowl of cold, day-old white rice, a few stalks of wilting green onions, and 2 eggs that were too small to be served to customers. It wasn't much, but to a starving girl, it was a canvas. She fired up the wok at the far station, the blue flame roaring to life, casting a warm glow on her tired face. She didn't measure anything. She cooked by feeling, by the rhythm of the sizzle. She tossed the rice into the hot oil, the grains dancing and separating, coating them in the golden yolk of the eggs until they shimmered like little nuggets of gold. She added the chopped scallions, a pinch of salt, a dash of white pepper, and her secret weapon, a spoonful of homemade lard she kept in a jar in her locker. The aroma that filled the kitchen wasn't sophisticated or complex, it was primal. It smelled of home, of comfort, of fire, and love. It was the smell of golden egg fried rice. Upstairs, Julian was walking through the darkened restaurant, heading toward his private elevator, his headache pounding. He was about to leave when he stopped. A scent. It drifted up from the service stairwell, faint but distinct. It didn't smell like truffles or wine or heavy cream. It smelled savory, smoky, warm. For the first time in 90 days, saliva flooded Julian's mouth. His stomach gave a loud, painful growl, demanding, pleading. Like a man possessed, Julian turned away from the elevator and followed the scent. He walked down the service stairs, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the concrete, drawn by an invisible thread. He pushed open the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen. There, under the single spotlight of the range hood, he saw her. A girl in a dirty, oversized dishwasher's uniform, her hair messy, eating from a simple bowl with a plastic spoon. She was eating with such genuine, unadulterated joy, closing her eyes as she chewed, that Julian felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it almost brought him to his knees. Alara didn't hear him enter. She took another bite, the crispy rice and fluffy egg melting on her tongue, warming her shivering body. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. She gasped, spinning around, dropping her spoon. "I'm sorry. I didn't steal anything expensive. It was just old rice," she stammered, terrified that Marco had returned to fire her. But it wasn't Marco. It was a tall, handsome man with hollow cheeks and eyes that burned with a terrifying intensity. He didn't look at her. He looked at the bowl in her hand. "Give it to me," Julian rasped, stepping closer, his hand outstretched. Alara blinked, confused. "Sir? It's just leftovers. It's dirty. I already ate from it." "I said, give it to me." Julian didn't wait. He snatched the bowl from her hands. He didn't care about hygiene. He didn't care about status. He grabbed a clean spoon from the counter and took a bite. The moment the rice hit his tongue, time stopped. The texture was perfect, each grain distinct and chewy, coated in the rich, creamy egg. The scallions provided a sharp, fresh bite, cutting through the richness. But it was the wok hei, the breath of the wok, that smoky, charred essence, that triggered a memory deep in his brain. A memory of a time before he was a CEO, before the trauma, when his mother used to cook for him. The flavor exploded in his mouth, waking up taste buds that had been dormant for months. He swallowed. He didn't gag. He didn't feel sick. He felt alive. He took another bite, and another. He shoveled the rice into his mouth, eating like a starving wolf, ignoring the grease on his chin. In 2 minutes, the bowl was empty. He scraped the bottom, wishing there was more. The warm weight in his stomach felt like a miracle. He looked up, his eyes clearing, the fog of starvation lifting. "Who cooked this?" he demanded, his voice strong for the first time in ages. "Was it you?" Alara was pressed against the counter, trembling. She saw the madness in his eyes and misunderstood it for anger. She thought he was furious that she had dared to cook in his kitchen. She thought she was about to be arrested for theft. "I'm sorry, I'll pay for it. Please don't call the police." Panic seized her. She saw an opening near the delivery dock. Before Julian could stop her, she bolted. She ran out the back door into the rainy night, leaving behind nothing but the empty bowl and the lingering scent of scallions. "Wait!" Julian shouted, lunging forward, but he was too weak from months of hunger to catch her. He stumbled, catching himself on the counter. He stared at the swinging back door. He picked up the plastic spoon she had dropped. It was cheap, yellow plastic, but to him, it was more valuable than gold. He turned to the empty kitchen, a new fire burning in his eyes. "Find her," he whispered to the silence. "I don't care who she is. I don't care where she goes. Find the girl who made this rice. She is the only one who can save me." The morning sun that bled through the heavy velvet curtains of Julian Thorne's penthouse did not bring warmth, but rather a cold, frantic desperation that gnawed at his bones like a starving rat. He lay in his king-size bed, surrounded by the finest silks money could buy, yet he was shivering, sweat beading on his forehead as his stomach cramped with a violent, demanding hunger that refused to be silenced by anything other than the memory of that specific, smoky fried rice. His personal chef, a man poached from a royal palace, had spent the last 6 hours attempting to recreate the dish based on Julian's feverish descriptions, presenting bowl after bowl of golden rice garnished with gold leaf, truffle oil, and organic scallions. But with every spoonful Julian forced past his lips, his body revolted. He spat the expensive creations into a silver bucket, heaving until his ribs ached, shouting that it was wrong, that it lacked the soul, the fire, the indescribable magic that the mysterious girl in the dirty uniform had conjured from thin air. "It tastes like chemicals!" Julian screamed, hurling a crystal glass against the wall where it shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. "Find her! I don't care if you have to tear the city apart brick by brick. Find the girl with the yellow spoon." His assistant, a terrified young man named David, was already coordinating a citywide manhunt, pulling security footage from the restaurant, but the rain that night had obscured the cameras, leaving the girl as nothing more than a blurry, ghostly silhouette vanishing into the dark. Meanwhile, in a cramped, moldy apartment on the outskirts of the city, Alara Vance was waking up to a different kind of nightmare. The sound of her grandmother's hacking cough rattled the thin walls, a sound that pierced Alara's heart with fear because she knew the medicine bottle on the nightstand was empty. She counted the crumpled bills in her wallet, $7.40, which wasn't even enough for a bus ticket, let alone the specialized medication her grandmother needed to breathe. She looked at her hands, still red and stinging from the harsh detergents of the kitchen, and felt a wave of hopelessness crash over her. She had run away from the restaurant last night, terrified that the tall, intense man, whom she hadn't recognized as the CEO but assumed was a manager, was going to arrest her for stealing eggs. Now she faced a terrifying choice: go back to Lumiere and beg for her job back, risking arrest or humiliation, or watch her grandmother suffer. Swallowing her pride, Alara kissed her grandmother's forehead, promised to bring back magic medicine, and walked 5 miles in worn-out shoes back to the restaurant, praying that she could slip in unnoticed. But the kitchen of Lumiere was a war zone. Chef Marco was pacing the floor like a caged tiger, his face purple with rage, kicking bins and screaming at the sous chefs. He had received a call from Julian Thorne's office at dawn. The CEO was coming back for lunch, and he demanded the golden rice, or he would shut the restaurant down and blacklist Marco from the culinary world forever. Marco, arrogant and incompetent, had no idea who had cooked the rice. He had been busy drinking wine in his office when the miracle happened. When Alara slipped through the back door trying to make herself invisible, Marco's eyes locked onto her like a predator spotting a wounded deer. "You!" he roared, storming across the kitchen and grabbing her by the collar of her uniform, lifting her off her feet. "Where were you? You left your station a mess. Do you know how much trouble you caused?" Alara trembled, terrified he knew about the eggs. "I'm sorry, chef. I felt sick. Please, I need this job." Marco was about to throw her out when a thought occurred to him. A memory of the lingering smell of scallions and wok hay he had noticed near the dish pit last night. He looked at Alara, really looked at her, and saw the faint grease stains on her sleeve, the smell of smoke still clinging to her hair. "Wait," Marco whispered, his eyes narrowing with cunning malice. "Did you touch the woks last night? Did you cook something?" Alara's face went pale. I just made some leftovers. I didn't steal." "Shut up," Marco hissed, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he realized his salvation had just walked in the door. "You little rat. You cooked the rice the CEO ate, didn't you? He thinks it was a masterpiece, probably because he was delirious with hunger." Marco released her, smoothing down his chef's coat. "Listen to me, gutter rat. You are going to cook that rice again, right now, but you are going to do it in the back prep room where no one can see you. And if anyone asks, I cooked it. Do you understand? If you say a word, I will frame you for theft and have you thrown in jail. Your grandmother will die alone while you rot in a cell." Alara felt tears stinging her eyes, the injustice burning her throat, but the image of her grandmother's empty medicine bottle flashed in her mind. I understand, chef. I will cook." "Good," Marco sneered. "Now get in there. The CEO is arriving in 10 minutes. Make it exactly the same or I will break your fingers." At 12:30 p.m., the atmosphere in the main dining room was electric with tension. Julian Thorne sat at the same table, looking even paler and more gaunt than the night before, his fingers drumming impatiently on the tablecloth. He had rejected every appetizer, every wine, his eyes fixed on the kitchen doors with a manic intensity. "Bring it out," Julian commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "If it is not the same, Marco, I will burn this place to the ground." The door swung open, and Chef Marco walked out, beaming with a fake, oily confidence, pushing a silver cart. On it sat a simple white bowl, steam rising from it in delicate spirals. "Mr. Thorne!" Marco bowed deeply. "I apologize for the confusion last night. It was a experimental dish I was working on. I didn't think it was ready for your refined palate, so I was hesitant to serve it again. But here it is, my signature golden fried rice." Julian didn't look at Marco. He looked at the rice. It looked correct, golden, fluffy, speckled with green. He picked up the spoon, not the plastic one, but a silver one, and took a hesitant bite. In the back room, Alara was huddled against the door, peeking through a crack, her heart hammering. She had poured her soul into that rice again, thinking of her grandmother, thinking of the comfort she needed, hoping that whoever ate it would feel the warmth she lacked. Julian chewed. He closed his eyes. The flavor was there, the smoke, the salt, the comfort. It was the rice. His stomach unclenched. He swallowed, and a sigh of pure relief escaped his lips. He took another bite, then another, eating with a voracious hunger that shocked the staff. Marco watched, sweating, his smile widening as he realized he had gotten away with it. "It is acceptable," Julian said after finishing the bowl, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "It is the same." He looked up at Marco, his eyes sharp. "You cooked this?" "Yes, sir," Marco lied smoothly. "It is a family secret recipe passed down from my grandmother in Naples." Julian stood up, his strength returning. He walked over to Marco. He towered over the chef. "Naples," Julian repeated thoughtfully. "Strange, because this rice uses a technique of wok hei that is specific to Cantonese street food, and the secret ingredient is clearly rendering lard from a specific cut of pork belly, not olive oil." Marco froze, his smile faltering. Well, fusion cuisine is my specialty, sir." Julian stared at him. Something was wrong. The rice was the same, but this man smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance, not the smoke and fire that the rice embodied, and he remembered the silhouette from last night. It was slender, smaller. "You are lying," Julian said quietly. "This rice has a soul. You do not." Marco panicked. "Sir, I swear, I can cook it again in front of you." "No," Julian cut him off. "I want to see your hands." "My hands? Show me your hands," Julian roared. Marco held out his manicured soft hands. Julian looked at them with disgust. "No burns, no calluses, no grease under the nails. You haven't touched a wok in years." Julian grabbed Marco by the collar, dragging him toward the kitchen doors. "Who is back there? Who is the ghost in your kitchen?" Marco struggled, terrified. "No one. It's just the dishwasher. She's a nobody." "Dishwasher." Julian stopped. The image of the girl in the dirty uniform flashed in his mind, the girl he had scared away. "Bring her to me." Marco realized he was cornered. If he admitted he forced her to cook, he was finished. But if he didn't... She left, sir. She cooked it and ran away again. She's a thief." Julian threw Marco to the ground. "Liar. She is here. I can feel it." Julian pushed open the kitchen doors, striding into the chaos. The chefs froze. Julian scanned the room. "Come out," he shouted. "I know you're here, the one who made the rice." Alara, hearing his voice, panicked. She thought he was angry. She thought Marco had blamed her for poisoning him. She scrambled out the back delivery exit, grabbing a bag of trash to blend in. Julian saw the movement, a flash of a pale blue dress he hadn't seen before. Her uniform was covered by an apron. He ran to the back door. He burst into the alleyway. It was empty except for a few stray cats, but on the ground, dropped in her haste, was a small plastic keychain in the shape of a radish. Julian picked it up. It was cheap, childish, and worn. He clenched it in his fist. She was close. She was real, and she was running from him. "You can run," Julian whispered to the empty alley, a hunter's obsession taking hold of his soul. "But you cannot hide. I have tasted your soul, and I will not let it go." He turned back to the restaurant, pulling out his phone. "By the building." He ordered his assistant. "By the restaurant. Fire Marco. And find me the employment records of every dishwasher who has worked here in the last 24 hours. I want a name." 72 hours had passed since the phantom girl vanished into the rainy night, and Julian Thorne had turned Lumiere from a restaurant into a fortress of obsession. He had bought the entire building cash, fired the management, and stationed security guards at every entrance with a single, bizarre instruction. "Look for a girl with burns on her hands who smells like scallions." He sat in the center of the kitchen, which was now silent and sterile, holding the cheap plastic radish keychain in his hand like a holy relic. The hunger was back, clawing at his insides with renewed vengeance. He hadn't eaten since that bowl of rice. His body was shutting down, his skin turning a translucent gray, his temper fraying into a terrifying instability. He had interrogated every staff member, but Marco, in a final act of spite before fleeing the city to avoid Julian's lawyers, had deleted the employee database and burned the hard copies of the payroll. Alara Vance didn't exist on paper. She was a ghost. "Sir," his assistant David approached cautiously, holding a tablet as if it might explode. "We have searched every culinary school and registered kitchen in the city. No one matches the description. But if she is desperate for money, she won't be able to stay hidden for long. I suggest a lure." Julian looked up, his eyes dark and hollow. "A lure? Host a competition?" David suggested. A golden spoon culinary search. Offer a prize so large that no starving chef could refuse. If she cooks for the money, she will come to you. Julian stood up, a dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time in days. Make the prize $5 million and broadcast it on every channel. If she is in the city, she will see it, and she will come to me. Across the city, in the damp, peeling room that Alara called home, the situation had spiraled from desperate to catastrophic. The landlord, a greasy man named Mr. Henderson who smelled of stale cigar smoke, was standing in her doorway blocking the light. "Time's up, Alara," he sneered, kicking her doorframe. "You're 2 months behind. I have a new tenant willing to pay double. You and that sick old woman need to be out by tomorrow noon, or I'm calling the cops to throw your junk on the street." Alara stood protectively in front of her grandmother's bed, her hands trembling. "Please, Mr. Henderson. I just lost my job because of a misunderstanding. I'll find work today, I promise." "You're blacklisted, sweetheart." Henderson laughed cruelly. "I heard from the grapevine. Chef Marco called every restaurant in town, said you're a thief and a poisoner. No one will hire you. You're done." He slammed the door, leaving Alara in the suffocating silence. She sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands. Blacklisted. Marco had destroyed her future to save his own skin. She looked at her grandmother, whose breathing was shallow and rattling. They had no food, no medicine, and by tomorrow, no roof. She felt a scream building in her throat, a scream of pure, unadulterated despair. She walked to the small, cracked TV in the corner, intending to turn it off to save electricity, when a breaking news alert flashed on the screen. Thorne Enterprises announces the Golden Spoon competition, seeking the city's greatest hidden chef. Grand prize, $5 million. Auditions start tomorrow at Lumiere. Alara froze. $5 million. It was an impossible amount. It was a lifeline thrown by the gods or a trap set by the devil. She looked at her hands, scarred and rough. She looked at the radish keychain she had lost, realizing she had left it behind. She knew the competition was at Lumiere, the place where she thought she was wanted by the police. But she looked at her grandmother's pale face. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I will cook," Alara whispered, a fierce light igniting in her amber eyes. "I will cook, and I will win, even if I have to walk into the lion's den." The next morning, the line outside Lumiere stretched for 3 blocks. Chefs from 5-star hotels, culinary prodigies with expensive knife sets, and arrogant restaurateurs stood in pristine whites, discussing molecular gastronomy and sous vide techniques. And at the very back of the line stood Alara. She wore her only clean outfit, a faded floral dress that looked like it belonged in a thrift store from the 1990s, and carried a plastic bag containing her own wok and a jar of her homemade lard. She looked so out of place that people openly stared and snickered. "Is she here to clean the toilets?" One chef laughed. "Maybe she's delivering the vegetables," another sneered. Alara ignored them, clutching her bag tight, focusing on the prize. When she finally reached the registration table, the receptionist, a woman with too much makeup and a sneer, looked her up and down. "Name?" "Alara Vance." "Resume?" I don't have one. I'm a home cook." The receptionist laughed. "This is a professional competition, honey, not a soup kitchen. Step aside." The rules said open to all, Alara insisted, planting her feet. "It didn't say professionals only. I have a right to audition." The commotion caught the attention of the head judge, a famous food critic named Victor, who was secretly on Julian's payroll to find the taste. Victor saw the desperation in Alara's eyes. He saw the worn-out hands. "Let her in," Victor said, bored. "We need some comic relief for the cameras. Let the peasant cook." The audition kitchen was a gleaming arena of pressure. 50 stations, 50 chefs, 1 hour. The theme, comfort. Alara stood at her station, surrounded by chefs pulling out foie gras, wagyu beef, and lobster. She had nothing but the basic ingredients provided in the pantry: flour, water, scallions, and pork belly. She closed her eyes, blocking out the noise, the mockery, the cameras. She thought of the rainy nights when her father would come home after losing everything, and her mother would make a simple bowl of scallion oil noodles to soothe him. It was a dish of poverty, but also of deep, abiding love. She began to work. She rendered the pork fat slowly, creating a golden, fragrant oil. She fried the scallions until they were dark and crispy, on the edge of burnt, releasing a complex, caramelized aroma. She hand-pulled the noodles, slamming the dough against the counter with a rhythmic thwack that made the other chefs jump. It was a violent, passionate sound. She boiled the noodles for exactly 90 seconds, drained them, and tossed them in the hot oil and soy sauce mixture. No garnish, no gold leaf, just dark, glossy noodles and the smell of home. Up in the observation deck, behind a one-way mirror, Julian Thorne sat in a wheelchair. He was too weak to stand for long, watching the monitors. He had tasted 40 dishes so far, all garbage, all plastic. He was losing hope. "Sir?" David pointed to screen 12. "Look at her." Julian looked. He saw the girl in the floral dress. He saw the way she handled the noodles. He saw the smoke rising from her wok. And then he saw her face. It was the girl from the alley, the girl who ran. His heart stopped. "It's her," he whispered, clutching the armrest of his chair so hard the leather cracked. "Bring that dish to me, now." Down on the floor, the buzzer rang. "Time's up," Victor shouted. He walked around tasting dishes. He reached Alara's station. He looked at the simple bowl of noodles with disdain. "Noodles? In a $5 million competition? You insult me." He was about to push the bowl away when a security guard stepped in, wearing an earpiece. "Stop," the guard said. "Mr. Thorne wants to taste this one personally." A hush fell over the room. The other chefs looked at Alara with shock and jealousy. Why did the CEO want the peasant's noodles? Alara felt her blood run cold. Mr. Thorne, the man who chased her. He knew. He was going to arrest her now. She looked for an exit, but the doors were blocked. The guard took the bowl and carried it away like a crown jewel. In the private room, Julian stared at the bowl. The smell. It was the same signature. The smoky, savory scent that bypassed his brain and went straight to his soul. His hand trembled as he picked up his chopsticks. He took a bite. The noodles were chewy, coated in the rich, savory oil. The scallions crunched. The flavor exploded. Salty, sweet, smoky, perfect. It wasn't just food, it was a hug. It was forgiveness. A tear rolled down Julian's cheek. He ate the whole bowl in silence, feeling the strength return to his limbs, the color return to his face. He stood up, pushing the wheelchair away. He didn't need it anymore. He needed her. "Bring her here," Julian commanded, wiping his mouth, "and clear the room. I want to be alone with her." Downstairs, the guard returned. "Miss Vance, Mr. Thorne will see you now." Alara's legs turned to jelly. I can't," she whispered. "Please, I just want to go home." "It's not a request," the guard said, gripping her arm. He marched her through the silent kitchen, into the private elevator. Alara felt like she was being led to the gallows. The elevator rose to the penthouse. The doors opened. Alara stepped into a room that looked like a palace, and there, standing by the window looking out at the city rain, was the man. He turned. He looked healthier, stronger, but his eyes were still burning with that terrifying intensity. He walked toward her. Alara backed away until she hit the wall. "Please," she begged, holding up her hands. "I didn't steal the eggs. I replaced them. I'll pay you back. Don't put me in jail. My grandmother is sick." Julian stopped. He looked at her terrified face. He realized with a jolt that she didn't know. She didn't know she was his savior. She thought she was a criminal. "Steal?" Julian asked, his voice soft, confused. "You think I want to arrest you for eggs? Why else would you chase me?" Alara cried. "Why else would you drag me here? I'm just a nobody." Julian stepped closer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the radish keychain. He held it up. "You dropped this." Alara gasped, "My keychain." "You have saved my life, Alara," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was starving. I was dying. Your food, it's the only thing I can eat. I didn't chase you to arrest you. I chased you because I need you." He took another step, trapping her against the wall. He wasn't touching her, but his presence was overwhelming. "I don't want your money," Julian whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "I want you to cook for me, only me, forever." Alara stared at him, her mind unable to process the shift. "Cook for you?" "Marry me," Julian blurted out. The words hung in the air, insane and heavy. "What?" "Become my personal chef, my wife, whatever it takes. I will give you the $5 million. I will cure your grandmother. I will buy you the moon if you want it. Just don't run away again." Before Alara could answer, before she could process the madness of a billionaire proposing marriage over a bowl of noodles, the elevator doors dinged open again. A woman walked in. She was stunning, dressed in haute couture with cold, sharp eyes. It was Sophia, the daughter of the banking magnate and Julian's actual fiancée arranged by his board of directors. a woman who hated food and hated poor people even more. Julian, Sophia's voice was like ice cracking. What is this? Who is this filthy creature? And why does the room smell like grease? She looked at Alara, then at Julian, then at the empty bowl on the table. A look of pure, unadulterated disgust crossed her face. Is this the cure you've been raving about? This street rat? Sophia walked over to Alara and poked her in the chest. Get out of my fiancé's penthouse. The cleaners are coming and you are cluttering the view. Julian's face darkened. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sophia, Julian warned, his voice low. Don't touch her. Or what? Sophia laughed. You'll break our merger over a dishwasher. She turned to Alara. Here. She pulled a $100 bill from her purse and threw it at Alara's face. For your trouble, now leave. Alara looked at the money on the floor. She looked at Julian. She looked at the keychain in his hand. Her pride, which had been battered for years, suddenly snapped. She didn't pick up the money. She looked at Sophia, then at Julian. I'm not for sale, Alara said quietly, and I don't marry men who let their girlfriends throw money at people. She pushed past Julian, dodging his outstretched hand, and ran for the elevator. Alara, wait, Julian shouted, but Sophia grabbed his arm. Let her go, Julian. If you chase her, the board will declare you mentally unstable. You will lose the company. Julian looked at the closing elevator doors, then at the woman holding his arm. He ripped his arm free with a force that sent Sophia stumbling. Then I lose the company, Julian snarled, because without her, I'm dead anyway. He ran for the stairs, leaving his fiancée and his empire behind, chasing the only thing that mattered, the girl with the scallion scent. The rain that battered the city of New York felt like a physical assault, a relentless deluge that mirrored the chaos unraveling in the streets below. Julian Thorne, a man who commanded billions, was sprinting, down the slick, oil-stained pavement of Fifth Avenue, his bespoke suit soaking through in seconds, his breath tearing at his lungs like shards of glass. He had abandoned his security detail, his fiancée, and his dignity in the penthouse lobby to chase a girl in a cheap floral dress who possessed the only magic capable of keeping him alive. Alara, he screamed, his voice raw, struggling against the roar of the traffic and the thunder. Stop! You don't understand! Ahead of him, Alara Vance was running on adrenaline and heartbreak, clutching her side where a stitch pierced her ribs, tears streaming down her face to mix with the rain. She wasn't running just because she was humiliated by Sophia. She was running because her phone had buzzed moments ago with a text from her neighbor. The landlord threw your grandma out. She's on the sidewalk. She's not moving. The panic was a cold claw in her chest, overriding everything else. She didn't care about the CEO, the money, or the noodles anymore. She just needed to get to the Bronx. But her worn-out shoes lost traction on a metal grate. She slipped. The world tilted, and she braced for the impact of the concrete, but it never came. Instead, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back from the edge of the busy road. She gasped, spinning around to find Julian, pale and gasping for air, holding her up. He looked terrible. His eyes were sunken, his skin clammy, but his grip was iron. Let me go, Alara sobbed, thrashing against him. I have to go. My grandmother, she's dying. He threw her out. Julian froze. The desperation in her voice cut through his own obsession. He looked into her eyes and saw a terror that mirrored his own. He didn't ask questions. He didn't negotiate. He simply shifted his grip, pulling her closer to shield her from the wind. Where? He demanded. Where is she? The Bronx, Alara choked out. Tenement 42, please, I need to catch a bus. We are not taking a bus, Julian growled. He tapped his earpiece. David, bring the car around now and get the medical team on standby. Helicopter evac to Mount Sinai VIP wing. Priority Alpha. Alara stared at him, the rain plastering her hair to her face. You would help her? I told you, Julian said, looking down at her with an intensity that burned. I will buy the moon if you want it. Saving one old woman is easy. Saving me? That is the hard part. The black limousine screeched to a halt beside them seconds later. They dove inside. Drive, Julian ordered. Fast. The ride to the Bronx was a blur of speed and silence. Julian held Alara's hand the entire time. He didn't say anything. He just let his warmth seep into her freezing fingers. When they arrived at the tenement, the scene was a nightmare. A pile of meager belongings, clothes, old books, a broken toaster sat soaking in the rain. And there, sitting on a plastic chair under a leaking awning wrapped in thin blankets, was Alara's grandmother. She was blue-lipped, barely conscious, wheezing for air. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, stood over her with an umbrella, smoking a cigar. "About time you showed up, Alara," Henderson sneered. "I told you, no rent, no roof. I'm running a business, not a charity." Alara screamed, bursting out of the car. "Grandma!" She fell to her knees in the mud, hugging the frail woman. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Henderson laughed. "Save the tears for the pawn shop. You got the money?" A shadow fell over Henderson. He looked up to see a man in a soaking wet $1,000 suit standing there. The man's eyes were darker than the storm clouds. "You threw a sick woman into the rain," Julian said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Henderson puffed out his chest. "Yeah? And who are you? Her pimp?" Julian didn't blink. "I am Julian Thorne." The cigar fell from Henderson's mouth. "The Thorne? The billionaire?" Julian turned to his security team, who had just pulled up in trailing SUVs. "Get the woman into the medical van, stabilize her, take her to Mount Sinai." As the medics swarmed, lifting the grandmother with a gentleness Alara had never seen, Julian turned back to Henderson. "Do you own this building?" Yes, sir," Henderson stammered. I was just following protocol." "David," Julian said to his assistant, "buy the building." "Sir?" "Buy it, right now. Cash. Triple the market value if you have to. Just get the deed in my hand in 5 minutes." Julian looked at Henderson. "And once I own it, evict him. Throw his things on the street, let him see how it feels to freeze." Henderson fell to his knees, begging, but Julian walked away. He walked to Alara, who was watching her grandmother being loaded into the ambulance, sobbing with relief. She looked at Julian. She saw the ruthlessness, yes, but she also saw the savior. "Why?" she whispered. "Why go this far?" Julian wiped a smudge of mud from her cheek. "Because you put scallions in my rice," he said simply, "and because no one hurts the person who feeds me." 3 hours later, the situation had shifted from the slums to the stratosphere. Alara's grandmother was in a private suite at the city's best hospital, resting peacefully, surrounded by machines that hummed with expensive efficiency. Alara sat by the bed, clean and dry, wearing a robe provided by the hospital. Julian sat on the sofa in the corner, working on his tablet. He hadn't left her side. "She will recover," Julian said, breaking the silence. "The doctors say it was pneumonia exacerbated by malnutrition. I have arranged for a private chef to handle her dietary needs." Alara stood up. She walked over to him. She didn't know what to say. She had hated the rich. She had hated him. But he had just saved her entire world with a wave of his hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. I will pay you back. I will work. I will cook." "I know you will," Julian said, putting the tablet down. "But we have a bigger problem." He turned the screen toward her. It was a news report. Scandal at Thorne Enterprises. CEO Julian Thorne mentally unstable. Stock plummets as engagement to Sophia banking heiress is called off. The screen showed footage of Julian running out of the penthouse looking disheveled. It showed Sophia giving an interview, looking tearful and victimized. "He is not himself," Sophia sobbed on camera. "He has been brainwashed by a street woman. She drugged him with some kind of food. I fear for the future of the company." Alara gasped. "She's lying. I didn't drug you." "I know." Julian rubbed his temples. "But the board of directors doesn't. Sophia's father is the chairman of the banking consortium that backs my loans. They are calling for a vote of no confidence. They want to remove me as CEO. They say I am unfit to lead because of my eating disorder and my obsession with you." "They can't do that," Alara said angrily. "You built that company." "They can," Julian said grimly, "unless I prove to them that I'm sane and that I'm healthy." He looked at Alara. His stomach gave a painful lurch. He hadn't eaten the noodles from the audition because he had run after her. He was starving again. His hands were starting to shake. "I need you to cook, Alara. Not just for me, for them." "For them?" "The board meeting is tomorrow night, a banquet. I have invited the top shareholders and Sophia's father. I told them I have found a cure for my condition. I told them I have found a chef who can restore my vitality." He leaned forward, his eyes burning. "You have to cook the banquet. You have to make the golden rice. You have to make the noodles. You have to make them taste what I taste. If you can win them over, if you can make them feel the soul of your food, I stay CEO and Sophia loses." Alara stepped back. "Cook for billionaires? For people who hate me? Julian, I'm a dishwasher. I don't know how to plate fancy food. They will laugh at me. Let them laugh." Julian said, standing up and swaying slightly from weakness. Taste is the only truth. Your food is honest. Their world is full of lies. Honest food cuts through lies. Please, Alara, my life, my empire, it's in your walk. He swayed again, his eyes rolling back. He was collapsing. Julian! Alara caught him. He was heavy, burning up. He was running on fumes. Okay, she cried, lowering him to the sofa. Okay, I'll do it. I'll cook. Just don't die on me. The next 24 hours were a blur of preparation. Julian had transformed the penthouse kitchen into a training ground, but he didn't hire fancy chefs to help her. He knew they would sabotage her. He hired her grandmother's old friends from the neighborhood, a butcher, a baker, a vegetable seller, rough, loud people who knew ingredients better than any Michelin star chef. Alara worked tirelessly. She decided on a menu of peasant food elevated. No foie gras, no caviar. She would serve them braised pork belly, clay pot rice, and hand-pulled noodles. Dishes that spoke of comfort, of history, of survival. But the enemy was not idle. Sophia had her spies. She knew about the banquet. He's letting the street rat cook? Sophia laughed, sitting in her father's office. Perfect. We don't even need to stop her. We just need to adjust the seasoning. She handed a small vial of clear liquid to a waiter who had been bribed. It's a tasteless chemical, she explained. It blocks the taste buds for an hour. Put it in the water glasses before the meal starts. If the board can't taste anything, they will think the food is bland garbage, and they will think Julian is crazy for praising it. The waiter nodded and slipped the vial into his pocket. The night of the banquet arrived. The boardroom of Thorne Enterprises had been converted into a dining hall. 12 old men in gray suits sat around the table looking skeptical and annoyed. Sophia sat next to her father, looking triumphant in a black dress. Julian sat at the head, looking pale but determined. He wore a tuxedo, but his eyes were fixed on the kitchen door. Gentlemen, Julian said, his voice steady despite his hunger. You have questioned my leadership. You have questioned my sanity. Tonight, I offer you a simple answer. A meal. A meal? Sophia's father scoffed. We are here to discuss billions, and you offer us dinner? This is a farce, Julian. Sign the resignation papers. Eat first, Julian said, then sign. The doors opened. Alara walked in. She wasn't wearing a chef's white coat. She was wearing a traditional apron over a simple dress. She looked terrified, but when she saw Julian, she steeled herself. Behind her, the servers brought out the first course, the golden egg fried rice. The aroma filled the room. It was intoxicating. Scallions, lard, fire. Even the skeptical board members sniffed the air. It smells greasy, Sophia muttered, signaling the waiter. The waiter moved around the table, pouring water. He slipped a drop of the chemical into every glass, except Julian's and Sophia's. The board members drank the water. Then they picked up their spoons. Alara watched, holding her breath. Julian watched, praying. The chairman took a bite. He chewed. He frowned. It tastes like nothing, the chairman said, dropping his spoon. It has texture, yes, but no flavor. It is bland, tasteless. What? Alara gasped. That's impossible. I tasted it myself. Another board member spat it out. It's just hot rice. There is no salt, no umami. Julian, is this your miracle cure? It's sawdust. Julian's face went white. He took a bite of his own portion. The flavor exploded in his mouth, perfect, salty, smoky. It is perfect, Julian shouted. Are you all mad? Can you not taste the fire? He is hallucinating, Sophia said softly, fake sadness in her voice. See, Father? He thinks this garbage is divine. His mind is gone. The anorexia has destroyed his brain. No! Alara ran forward. I seasoned it perfectly. Something is wrong. Security! Sophia's father stood up. This is an insult. Arrest this woman for fraud. And Julian, you are relieved of command effective immediately. Take him to a mental health facility. Security guards moved in. They grabbed Alara. They grabbed Julian. It was a coup. A setup. Let me go! Alara screamed. You poisoned them! You did something to them! Prove it, Sophia whispered, walking past Alara. Oh wait, you can't, because you're nobody. Julian struggled, weak from hunger. He looked at Alara being dragged away. He looked at his empire crumbling. He looked at the untouched food, and then he saw it. The waiter. The waiter was shaking, avoiding eye contact, trying to hide the empty vial in his pocket. Julian's mind snapped into hyperfocus. Wait! Julian roared. David, lock the doors! No one leaves! David, loyal to the end, hit the emergency lock button. The steel shutters slammed down. "What is the meaning of this?" the chairman yelled. "One simple test," Julian said, breaking free from the guard with a burst of desperate strength. He grabbed the waiter. He ripped the vial from the waiter's pocket. He held it up. "What is this?" It's eye drops, sir," the waiter stammered. "Is it?" Julian uncorked it. He walked over to Sophia. "If it is eye drops, then you won't mind if I put a drop in your wine, Sophia?" Sophia flinched. "Don't be ridiculous." "Drink it." Julian slammed the vial onto the table. "Drink the water the board drank, Sophia. If you can taste the food after drinking that water, then I am crazy. But if you can't, then you are a saboteur." The room went silent. All eyes turned to Sophia. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she spat. "I'm a Rossi. And I am the king of this castle," Julian said. He grabbed Sophia's glass of wine, which was untouched. He poured a drop of the chemical from the vial into it. "Drink, or admit you poisoned my board." Sophia stared at the glass. She knew what the chemical did. It numbed the tongue. It wasn't poison, but it was proof of sabotage. Sophia faltered. She is a witch. She stole you from me." "She saved me from you," Julian shouted. He turned to the chairman. "Your daughter sabotaged the meal to steal my company. Is this the integrity of the banking consortium?" The chairman looked at his daughter's guilty face. He looked at the waiter cowering in the corner. He picked up Julian's bowl of rice, the one that hadn't been tampered with. He took a bite. His eyes widened. The flavor hit him. "Oh my God," the chairman whispered. This is incredible." He ate another spoonful. "It reminds me of my mother's cooking in the village before the war." The other board members, realizing the trick, reached for the untainted serving platter in the center. They ate. Groans of pleasure filled the room. The taste blocker only worked if they drank the water. The food itself was pure. "This pork," one member cried. "It melts." "The noodles," another sighed. "I haven't felt this happy in 20 years. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by the euphoric dopamine hit of comfort food. Alara stood there, her apron crooked, watching the most powerful men in the city fighting over her fried rice. Julian walked over to her. He took her hand. "You did it," he whispered. "You won." "We won," Alara corrected. She looked at Sophia, who was now being shunned by her own father. "But, Julian, look at him." She pointed to the waiter. The waiter wasn't looking at Sophia. He was looking at his phone. He was typing a message. Plan A failed. Initiate Plan B. Suddenly, the lights went out. A red emergency light began to flash. The building shook. Boom! An explosion rocked the lower floors. "What was that?" the chairman screamed. The intercom crackled. "Fire in the server room! Gas leak detected! Evacuate! Evacuate!" "It's not a gas leak," Julian said, pulling Alara close. "It's Marco. He knows the building's layout. He's trying to burn the evidence of his embezzlement before I can audit the files." "We have to get out," David yelled. "The elevators are down. The stairs." The board members stampeded for the exit, but the door was jammed. Electronic lock malfunction. They were trapped on the 50th floor. Smoke began to seep under the door. "We're going to die!" Sophia screamed. Julian looked at the window. He looked at Alara. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Always," she said. Julian picked up a heavy chair. He smashed the panoramic window. Wind and rain howled into the room. "We climb," Julian said. "There is a window washer scaffold 1 floor down. We have to jump." "Jump?" The chairman looked down 50 floors. "Are you insane?" "I'm hungry," Julian said with a wild grin, "and I'm not dying before dessert." He grabbed Alara. They stepped onto the ledge. The wind whipped her dress. "On 3, Julian said. 1, 2, 3. They jumped into the void. The wind howled like a banshee 50 stories above the pavement as Julian and Alara plummeted through the rain-lashed darkness, landing with a bone-jarring clang onto the metal grating of the window washer's scaffold. The impact tore a scream from Alara's throat, but Julian's arms were a vice around her, absorbing the shock, shielding her body with his own as the suspended platform swung violently in the gale, slamming against the glass facade of the skyscraper with a terrifying crack. They were alive, suspended over the abyss by 2 steel cables that groaned under the strain of the storm and their combined weight. "Don't look down!" Julian shouted over the roar of the wind, his face inches from hers, his eyes wide with adrenaline and a fierce protective fire. "Look at me, Alara, just look at me." Alara gripped his lapels, her knuckles white, nodding frantically as the scaffold tipped precariously. Above them, smoke billowed from the shattered window of the boardroom, blotting out the lights of the city. "The cable!" Alara screamed, pointing upward. One of the steel lines, damaged by the explosion's debris, was fraying, snapping strand by strand with the sound of gunshots. "We have to break the window!" Julian roared. He let go of her with one hand, grabbed a heavy metal bucket left by the washers, and swung it with all his remaining strength against the glass of the 49th floor. Smash! The reinforced glass didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed. He swung again. Smash! The glass groaned. The cable pinged, one strand left. "Together!" Julian yelled. They kicked out simultaneously, driving their heels into the spiderweb center. The glass exploded inward. They tumbled into a dark office just as the cable snapped, sending the scaffold plummeting into the darkness below. They rolled across the carpeted floor, gasping for air, covered in glass dust and rain, alive by a margin of seconds. But the danger wasn't over. The air on this floor was thick with the smell of gasoline. This wasn't just a random fire. It was an arsonist's masterpiece. "The server room is down the hall," Julian coughed, pulling Alara to her feet. "Marco, he's trying to destroy the digital backups of the embezzlement. If he burns those servers, the evidence against him disappears, and the insurance payout covers his tracks." They ran through the dark corridors, guided only by the flickering emergency lights. As they turned the corner toward the server room, they saw him. Marco stood there, illuminated by the glow of a fire he had started in a trash can, holding a jerry can of gasoline. He looked deranged, his chef's white stained with soot, a manic grin on his face. "You!" Marco screamed, seeing them emerge from the smoke like ghosts. "Why won't you just die? You ruined everything. I was the king of the kitchen until you brought that gutter rat in." He splashed gasoline toward them, pulling a lighter from his pocket. "I'll burn you both. No witnesses." Julian stepped in front of Alara. "Marco, it's over. The police are downstairs. The board knows. The board is dead." Marco laughed, flicking the lighter. "And you're next." He threw the lighter. The trail of gasoline on the floor ignited with a whoosh, a wall of fire racing toward them. Julian grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, pulling the pin and spraying a path through the flames, but the heat was intense. Marco turned to run, heading for the emergency stairwell, the only exit. "He's getting away!" Alara shouted. She saw a serving cart left in the hallway, probably from a morning meeting. Without thinking, she grabbed a silver platter, a heavy decorative lid. She didn't have the strength to fight a man, but she had the aim of a girl who had thrown rocks at coyotes to protect her chickens. She hurled the silver platter like a discus. It sailed through the smoke, spinning violently, and struck Marco squarely in the back of the knees. Marco buckled, screaming as he fell forward. He scrambled to get up, but he slipped on the pool of gasoline he had spilled. He slid, crashing headfirst into the heavy steel door of the server room. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. Julian rushed forward, kicking the lighter away, and dragged Marco's body away from the fire just as the sprinkler system finally kicked in, drenching them all in a torrential, freezing downpour. The fire hissed and died. The room plunged into darkness and silence, save for the sound of water and their ragged breathing. Julian leaned against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He pulled Alara down with him, holding her face in his hands. "You hit him with a serving platter," Julian wheezed, a laugh bubbling up in his chest. "That was magnificent." Alara laughed too, a sound of pure relief leaning her forehead against his. "I told you," she whispered. "I don't like food waste, but for him, I made an exception." 1 week later, the sun shone brightly over the city, cleansing the grime of the storm. The headline on every newspaper and digital screen read, "Restaurant Revolution, the dishwasher who saved the CEO." The scandal had been the most sensational event of the decade. Marco was in prison, facing charges of arson, embezzlement, and attempted murder. Sophia and her father were under investigation by the SEC for corporate sabotage. The eye drop incident had gone viral, destroying the reputation of the banking consortium overnight. But in the private garden of the Thorne estate, none of that mattered. A long table was set under a blooming cherry blossom tree. Seated at the table were Julian, looking healthy and vibrant, his cheeks filled out, his eyes sparkling. David, his loyal assistant, and Alara's grandmother, who had made a miraculous recovery, thanks to the best medical care money could buy. And standing at the head of the table, wearing a custom-made chef's coat that fit her perfectly, was Alara. She placed a large, steaming clay pot in the center of the table. "Dinner is served," she announced, her voice confident. She lifted the lid. The aroma of the golden egg fried rice wafted out, smoky, savory, comforting. It wasn't just rice anymore, it was a symbol of survival, of truth, of love. Julian stood up. He didn't wait for her to serve him. He took the ladle and served her grandmother first, then David, then Alara. "Sit," Julian said, pulling out the chair next to him. "Tonight, the chef eats with the family." Alara sat, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Julian, Shh." He silenced her by placing his hand over hers. "I have an announcement." He turned to the small group. "For years, I thought power was about money, about control, about eating at the most expensive tables alone, but I was starving. I was empty." He looked at Alara, his gaze softening into pure adoration. "Then I found a grain of gold in the dust. Alara didn't just feed my body, she fed my soul. She taught me that the most valuable ingredient in any dish and in any life is heart." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out a small velvet box, but inside it wasn't a diamond. It was a ring made of gold, shaped delicately like a twisting vine of scallions, with a small, brilliant yellow diamond in the center, the color of the egg yolk. "I promised I would buy you the moon," Julian whispered, "but I think we should start with a restaurant. I bought Lumiere. I renamed it." He pointed to a sign leaning against the garden wall. It read, "Alara's Kitchen." "It's yours. You are the head chef. You are the owner, 100% equity, no strings attached." Alara gasped, covering her mouth. "Julian, I can't accept that." "You can," Julian said, getting down on one knee in the grass, "because I'm asking for something in return, something much more expensive." He held up the ring. "Alara Vance, the girl who smells like scallions and saves lives with serving platters. Will you marry me? Will you be the only person allowed to cook for me for the rest of my life?" The garden went silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Alara looked at the ring. She looked at her grandmother, who was nodding with a tearful smile. She looked at Julian, the man who had chased her down an alley, jumped off a building for her, and learned to love the simple things because of her. "I have a condition," Alara said, trying to look serious, though a smile was breaking through. Julian blinked. "Name it, anything." "You have to do the dishes," Alara grinned, "every night, for the rest of your life." Julian laughed, a loud, joyous sound that echoed across the estate. "Deal. I'll even wear the apron." "Then yes," Alara whispered. "Yes, chef." He slid the ring onto her finger. He kissed her, and for the first time in his life, Julian Thorne felt completely, utterly full. The hunger was gone. Epilogue. 3 years later. Alara's Kitchen was not just a restaurant, it was a pilgrimage site. People lined up for blocks, not for truffle lobster, but for the golden menu. Simple, elevated comfort food that made grown men cry. It had 3 Michelin stars. The first time in history a restaurant serving fried rice as a main course had achieved such an honor. Inside the bustling kitchen, Alara moved with the grace of a conductor, directing her team of chefs, many of whom were former street vendors she had hired and trained. "Order up on table 4, extra scallions," she called out. The swinging doors opened and a waiter walked in. It was Julian. He was wearing a suit, but over it he wore a simple white apron that said "Dishwasher" in bold letters. He wasn't serving customers. He was carrying a small toddler in one arm and a plate of chopped fruit in the other. "Mama!" the little boy squealed, reaching for Alara. It was their son, Leo. "Hey, little bean!" Alara kissed his cheek, then looked at Julian. "What are you doing back here? You have a board meeting in 10 minutes. "I canceled it." Julian shrugged, stealing a piece of crispy pork from her station. "My wife is cooking the special today, and my son wants to see how the magic happens. Besides..." He leaned in and kissed her neck, right there in front of the staff, who cheered and whistled. "I have to start my shift at the sink soon. A deal is a deal." Alara smiled, flipping a wok full of golden rice into the air, the flames roaring up to greet them. "Get to scrubbing, CEO. These pans won't clean themselves." As Julian walked to the back, rolling up his expensive sleeves to plunge his hands into the soapy water, he looked back at his wife and son, surrounded by the warmth, the noise, and the delicious smells of a life well lived. He smiled. He had never been richer.